July 11th, everybody. I hope everybody's fantastic. This is 2025. We're going to talk about Santa Clarita real estate. I want to give you those numbers. We have a 7 day market snapshot that I put together this morning. 6 listings coming soon, 83 listings brand new on the market for sale in the past 7 days. 97 listings have had their prices changed. A majority of these are reductions in the past 7 days. We do see this being kind of a very normal trend, and a price change doesn't mean dramatic in a lot of cases. It could be just a strategy by the agents in order to try to get the internet syndication sites to pick up those listings again and put them out there in front of people. And that is very effective. In fact, in a lot of cases, when a property is listed for sale, depending on the type of market, if the market slowed down a little bit, once that price reduction is enacted, usually an offer comes pretty quickly after that. And at least we start to see a lot of showings increase. The triggers where people used to say, "Well, this is going to cause people to think sellers are desperate." That's the old school real estate. We don't see that anymore because people are able to evaluate purchase prices or values on properties very easily when they're looking online in most cases. Plus, most agents have it baked into their process when they're representing buyers to actually look at properties that could have an ability of having something less written on them or less values in that listing price, and then taking their clients, showing them because they have an offering strategy, they're able to formulate, put together in writing to be able to send over to that seller's agent. And a lot of times those actually jump into escrow because the seller was just missing where they should have been priced. And it could have been pushed back against their agent at the beginning. That does happen quite a bit. And then what happens? So the agent lists it for sale. Once an offer does come in, then the negotiation process starts, and then the buyers ends up being very happy. They get the house. The seller's also very happy because now they've looked at that particular price being offered. Now their price point is where it should be. And usually that doesn't then have any issues with appraisal, because if there is going to be a loan written on the property, of course, it has to be appraised. If the property is priced correctly, then it's not going to impact that because, of course, well, it's priced correctly. And that's what the buyer bought it at. All right, so that's 97 properties price changes. Back on the market, properties 30. We see that number increase depending on when I'm doing the snapshot as we get later in the week, like Friday, because we have Monday through Thursday encapsulated into that 7 day snapshot. We see those numbers jump up a little bit. So we have that 30 properties back on the market. We have 39 properties that have gone pending status, 27 active under contract. These are properties going into escrow. I'll tell you, if you're looking at residential real estate and you happen to see things that are out there that are known as active backup offer, active in contract, it depends on the site that you're looking at, you will find out those properties are in escrow. But in most cases, those particular sellers are hoping that they'll get additional offers written on those properties. So that's why they're advertising them in that particular way, at least for backup purposes. So maybe, and you wouldn't believe this, I'll tell you, you would believe it. In some cases, we have clients that maybe had missed out on an opportunity. Maybe an offer was written and they weren't able to get their offer accepted. What I do as a buyer's agent in some cases, well, I'm a buyer's agent and a listing agent, but when I'm playing buyer's agent, when I have that hat on, what I'll do is I'll make sure I keep in contact with the agent for every offer any of my buyers have submitted. Because just in case those particular buyers that they happen to choose from the seller's end of it, maybe at the time they appeared so fantastic. And in addition, they could have appeared too good to be true. A lot of times, when things in real estate, buyers, for example, are too good to be true for a real estate seller, a lot of times that deal happens to fall apart. It just depends. But as a buyer's agent, if I'm wearing that particular hat, then I will keep in contact with those particular agents. And if in fact there's any kind of uh, an issue that comes up, usually I get that phone call first. And I'll also wait once the inspection timeframes are getting close to being done, or even after the home inspection, I'll reach out and say, "Hey, how's it going on that deal? Remember, we wrote the offer on that property. My buyers weren't selected, but how's everything going?" In some cases, they'll say, "It's funny you call. Actually, I'm so glad you did. Are your buyers still interested?" And then, boom, we make the deal work because of that due diligence and follow up. They didn't have to start reaching out and finding everybody that wrote offers and contacting them. A lot of times this works out. So it's something that you might want to hit up your agent about if they're not prepping you about this being part of their process when you're going through that talk, whether it's a Zoom meeting or in person. A lot of times people will come into the open houses, of course, Santa Clarita open houses, that's the system. But they'll come into open houses and they'll be walking around looking, and I'll ask them, I say, has anybody ever walked you through the process of buying real estate in today's market with everything that's going on? And there's no obligation. It takes, 30, 45 minutes, but it covers everything. I talk to people about what happens in the lending front, what to look for. If they happen to be cash buyers, then we talk about that. But if they need to get a loan, secure a mortgage loan, then we talk about how that works, the different parts of that process, what types of lenders are out there, what questions to ask, how to make sure that you are getting a good deal in that regard. And then we move into the market, the best ways to search for real estate. How do you actually know that you're not paying too much for houses? What do you look at? And then also we talk about new housing. New housing is a big deal. There's a lot of new housing out here. Is it possible to have your own agent at a new housing tract? Doesn't cost you any money, and then have them negotiate that potential, whatever it is, the price, getting extra options, getting closing costs paid. Is that a possibility? Then how does that work? How does that mechanism? So we talk about those things. And then also throughout the inspection process, I talk to those buyers about what needs to happen close to the beginning. If in fact you find something that you like with your agent and you're going to write an offer, maybe you write the offer and you have your offer accepted. Before you start to spend money, we have a discussion about you as that real estate buyer going and door knocking those neighbors, the people that would have the most impact with you living in that house, because you don't know who's there. You want to ask them questions. How do you like the neighbor? Are there any issues? And, you might find that neighbor that says, oh my God, at 6 o'clock every morning, this massive plane, because we're in the flight path of LAX, this massive plane comes over every morning, at least 5 days a week. And then oh yeah, little Johnny, he's great, but they're starting a band in their garage and that's next door. And they just bang on those. You see what I'm going? And then also you might identify that person that has a restraining order against you living next door too. So that might not be a good fit. But you got to door knock those properties that have an impact on where you're going to be living. And you want to do that early before you start spending money. What do you spend money on? Well, that's another part of the discussion. You're going to need a home inspector. That's super important. I have people that I recommend. You might have people in your periphery or in your social groups that happen to do that particular task. And then I would talk to you about what kind of certifications are important, what kind of reports should they be producing, and maybe even to ask for examples of past reports they put together so you can kind of judge their work and even bounce it off me if in fact I don't know them, don't know their reputation, bounce it off me so we can look at those and say, well, these are the things they missed. Or maybe they make, when they're talking about it, maybe there's some pictures that are showing certain things, but they're not commenting on it. It's good to look at those sorts of items when you're looking at gauging somebody's work ethic, to be able to explain that, and maybe you'll hire somebody else. So that's the home inspection part of it. Appraisal. What happens if the property doesn't appraise? Is that a possibility? Where does that leave you as a real estate buyer? And in addition, talking a little bit about what the market is trending towards. If the market is a super hot and heavy seller's market where there's a lot of buyers, multiple offers on each property, what actual contingencies should you remove? Should you waive your home inspection? Should you waive the appraisal? Are you even able to waive the appraisal? How can you stay competitive in the real estate market if you're competing with five other buyers on a particular house? Besides, of course, price is the easiest thing to talk about. But besides that, what other little nuances can you have formulated within your offer for that property by your agent that might put you above the others, even if the others happen to net the sellers more money? There's lots of things to do. So we talk about that. We talk about the escrow process. We also talk about CC&Rs and HOAs and Mellows if the properties happen to have them. Again, this is prior to a buyer actually going out there and working with a specific agent. This is an educational process I put together. But talk about those Mellows, those HOAs. HOAs really do. Can you even tell? Is there a place to call where you can find out, hey, what do you guys do? I'm thinking about buying a house in this particular neighborhood. What do you do as an HOA? Do you have board meetings? Is it self-managed? Do you have the whole board of directors there within the community? You guys have your own meetings in the clubhouse, or do you actually offload that management somewhere else, outsource it to some kind of management, property management company that takes care of all that? And you'll see there's different approaches for both. If you happen to be with a one that has the real humans involved, not so much a corporation, but they live in those they live in the houses there, they have those meetings there. Maybe it's not as easy to get stuff done and approved there because you have those personality conflicts. If you have the other type that's more officially managed, maybe it would be easier to get things done because they don't care who you are. They just look at the rule book and they say, well, here it doesn't say anything against this particular thing this property owner wants to do being against the rules. So here, we'll bless it and approve it. Those are other things. And then finally, Mello-Roos. If in fact there's extra taxes on the property, what are those covered? How long are they good for? How long do you have to pay that? What happens at the very end? If in fact, I've seen this at listing, Mello-Roos to end next year, Mello-Roos to end in 2027. Really? Is that 100% for sure? Because it's 100% for sure, and the buyer is basing their buying decision based on something that's being advertised and marketed about a property, stating that the Mello-Roos are going to end at a certain point. I definitely want to get that in writing and just to make sure. But even besides that, even if an agent swears to it, you definitely want to make sure it's true because then you're going to have to sue later and all this other happy nonsense. So what I would do is say, how do you find out if in fact the Mello-Roos, if that's what's being teased, how long the Mello-Roos is going to go on? And then the other question to ask, as I talk about in my buyer briefing, is if it's going to end, how do you know it's going to end? Is there a mechanism in place to have it continue? Because maybe it's going to end in 2036, for example. I know some that are going to be ending then. What's the what's the showing if in fact one of those entities still needs it? Now, Mello-Roos and those special assessment taxes, they pay for that infrastructure. It used to be that every builder everywhere would just pay that. That was their cost to be a big major builder in the world. They would pay all that cost up front, and then they would sell the properties. They would adjust those prices and make it work out. So when the buyers bought them, it recouped whatever they paid out to have those Mello-Roos taxes covered by the new communities they were putting in. Well, that changed back in late 80s, early 90s. Mello and Roos were a couple of senators, and they had their own thoughts on that process. And they were able to then have builders, big major builders. I'm sure um, there was a lot of concessions given back then. But anyway, once this was approved, the major builders could now work out all those numbers and then pass those costs onto each individual homeowner. That covers street lighting, infrastructure, that covers the roadways, sidewalks, that covers the emergency services, all the stuff a particular community or area needs. That's what those Mello-Roos taxes usually are going to, have to be paid. And then they split that up depending on how many homes, and they do the math as far as what the traditional family would be, and then they pass that on to the individual homeowners, and it's part of your taxes in Los Angeles County. This is just good to know. I talk about this in the meeting too. A typical property taxes usually go for 1.25%. That's very common, and it's going to fluctuate up and down, but it's just about right there. It might be as low as 1.18 and maybe 1.27. So anyway, but that's kind of a good rule of thumb for each individual property. You'll be able to find out what that number is in your discovery process, and in fact, even before you go into escrow, depending on the area, the agent should have the wherewithal to be able to figure that out. They can actually look specifically at a residence and know exactly what they happen to be paying in taxes and what their rate is. Now, it could be that their assessed value on that property is going to be less than what yours is going to be because you're going to be buying it brand new. Once you purchase a property, it's going to get that new reassessed value at whatever you paid for it. That's going to be the value as far as the tax assessor goes. It could be somebody's living in the property and they've been there for 20 years, and maybe the last time their property was reassessed was 7 years ago when the prices were different than they are today. So maybe that tax rate, it's the same, but what they're paying out is based on a different assessed value. So that's fine. But at least you'll know the number. Now, Mello-Roos are going to be in addition to that. They could be a lot more. They could be double what you're paying in Los Angeles County, depending on the area. and depending on the offering, depending on what those costs happen to be. And then those can continue for 20, 30, 40, whatever it happens to be a time frame. So that's an obligation. What we see as real estate buyers is usually the price per square foot for those properties that have those Melrose taxes, there's adjustments in there. So typically when they go looking at properties for Melrose, the price per square foot, depending, and most of them are newer, but their price per square foot is probably going to be less than what property doesn't have Melrose. You see the cost adjustment. So I talk about that as well. Whew, I went off on a tangent. Anyway, that's how that works. So if you have an agent, have them give you the education, have them talk to you about the market, what you can expect to happen, give you some scenarios of where they've worked with buyers recently, what those buyers, what that decision process was looking like, the questions that they had asked, and also what were any kind of problems that came up that you were able to solve for those buyers. It's super important, especially when it comes to negotiation, because that's really what your agent's going to be doing. Besides helping you negotiate the initial offering, then when you get into that escrow process, the negotiation really begins at that point because there's going to be repairs that might be requested, certain certain monies back, or maybe adjustments to closing costs in that process if in fact things are discovered. And that's where negotiation really is going to hold true and needing to be important for your agent, what they're going to be with the skill set that they're bringing with them. All right. So now, just finishing this, we had 56 properties closed this past week, 7 expired, 14 canceled. These are properties that didn't sell, so they canceled them, and then 7 expired. I already said that. 13 have been put on hold, 4 have been withdrawn from the market. Sellers aren't wanting to sell those, at least at the present time. That's your 11th update. It's a prime number. 11's my number. I love that. So it is 7/11, 2025. We're at Friday. Open houses scheduled this weekend. In fact, we can go to, just real quick, if I can find the right button, Santa Clarita houses.com, something to check out. And what I did is you can go there to the very home page. I did write a big article yesterday pertaining to a lot of this information I'm sharing, but let's see how many homes are being hosted open. 237. So that's 237 so far. There'll probably be some more additions to that, but that's going to be all across Santa Clarita Valley. And of course, the system, Santa Clarita openhouses.com. You can go anywhere in Southern California and also see those open houses. Plus, it has the regular inventory there for sale also. So, I mean, it's kind of a one stop shop. I left it unlocked. You're going to get an irritating pop up. Please entertain me. You don't have to click it, just click the X and continue on your search. If you do want to save your searches, you can do that very simply there. I'm Connor with Honor. When you're ready, reach out to me, and I would love to help you through that whole process. This has been your update. We'll be back tomorrow, and thank you for hopefully you were entertained. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.